You're listening to the podcast of High Rock Acton, where we seek to connect to God personally, to God's people, and to God's purposes. You can join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. and learn more about us at highrockacton.org.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Will. I'm one of the pastors at our church. I'm so glad you're here, especially after a little bit of a snow dusting. Doesn't really bother us, does it? We're New Englanders, and I'm so glad we could gather and worship. As Becky said, if you're new, I'm especially delighted you're here. I'd love to connect more with you after the service. Most of us live in this area, and we have these great organizations. One of them is the Acton Boxborough United Way, and this past year they did this extensive needs assessment of our community. It gives us kind of a snapshot of what's happening all around us, and I just want to share with you some of the findings. First, they reported on the strengths of our community, and as a whole, our community is increasingly diverse, well-educated, with great schools, lots of educated people, and economically strong. We have a broad and deep caring network. We have 3 Dunkin' Donuts, a Starbucks, and our town isn't shut down when it snows a foot, right? Acting strong. We got a lot going for us. Then the needs, and the needs are kind of what you might expect for a town like ours. Basically, the drive to become a diverse, educated, economically wealthy people fueled by a lot of coffee that we're drinking has totally stressed us out. Evidently, teens, young adults, parents, and even children are reporting high levels of stress. And on top of that, many of us are feeling isolated and disconnected, just longing for a sense of home that can hold us. Some people just need an affordable home that they can buy in this area. Others are wrestling with addiction or mental illness, marital strife, even domestic violence. Many of those needs don't really surprise me. But what did surprise me, and what most surprised those who organized the survey, is this. They found out that despite this vast network of care and all the assets and resources that are out there in our community, despite that they're there, most people in need report not knowing where to go for help. Isn't that interesting? And they also found that when people do know where to turn for help, they also found that many people have difficulty reaching out for help because of shame or because of stigma, because it's uncomfortable to put yourself at the mercy of others, because the system is complex and you can't always even understand it or trust it's going to solve the problem. 2 weeks ago when we started this series, I shared this quote from Richard Rohr that the real question of life is about what we do with our pain. If we don't transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. And so really the reason that we gather here as a community every single week is not to just be a social club, though I enjoy seeing all of you, but it's so we can tap into that transformation of our pain that God wants to work in our lives. So the question I want to ask you today is, do you know where to go when you're hurting? Do you know where to go with your pain? And if you do know where to go, are you able to actually reach out and ask for help and receive care? You know, something I so appreciate about this story of God with his people is that while God's people have all kinds of problems, they have all kinds of problems, they never had the problem of where to go with your problems. They never had the problem of where to go with your problems. And that's because the God that we encounter in this book and in this story is a realistic God. You know, some of us are unrealistic people. We underestimate people and problems. Our family's really into watching this new show, Supergirl, on CBS Monday nights. It's entertaining. And I love a lot about Supergirl. But she is less than super when it comes to assessing reality. Nearly every episode, she naively trusts someone and then walks into this big trap where she gets trapped and all this bad stuff happens. And even though that happens every single episode, she never learns from it and never anticipates or plans for any potential problems. And this just drives me crazy every time I watch it. Hey, Supergirl, that shady character from last episode says he needs some help, so go meet him in an abandoned warehouse. And she's like, okay, and she just walks right in the front door. Boom, trapped. Come on, Supergirl. Sorry, some things upset me. But the good news is that God is more realistic than Supergirl. God knows so often that we walk into traps and we end up deprived or empty-handed or without a way forward for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes our poor choices, life circumstances, the system takes advantage of us. God gets that. He knows it. God anticipates it. And because God is merciful and wise, God plans for it. God plans for it. So did you know that when God made a covenant with his people, and he actually laid out this extensive blueprint for community and how we can do life together, it wasn't just a list of ideals. God actually includes in that blueprint an official job, a vocation called the Redeemer. In the passage Catherine just read for us, we're introduced to this notion of Redeemer, a guardian Redeemer. It comes from this Hebrew word, and it's very important, Goel. And some variation of Goel is used 6 times in this short chapter. You know, for those who are new to our series, this is their first time, we've been studying the book of Ruth. And it's the story of 2 widows, Ruth and Naomi, whom life has left empty-handed. And this 4-chapter short story is all about how God fills their lives again. But not through any huge miracle, which is often what we want. Rather, God transforms their bitterness through this everyday miracle of everyday people living out God's love in everyday ways. In each chapter, we've gotten a glimpse of how different forms of God's love can fill our lives. In chapter 1, when Naomi was just feeling so bitter inside, her daughter-in-law Ruth offered her hand and her presence and her promise that I will never leave you. I will stand next to you even unto death. Ruth practiced this word we looked at, chesed. It's about God's covenant faithfulness and loyalty and clinging and never letting go. And so by the end of chapter 1, we know for all the pain they're facing, they don't need to face it alone. In chapter 2, Ruth and Naomi say, okay, what are we going to do? We have nothing. And so they're just on the hunt for food, their daily bread. And they encounter Boaz, this wealthy field owner who is described again and again by the word kindness. And so he's just one of those guys that has his eye out for people and takes notice of who's hurting. And he just kind of makes provision for them and said, hey, here's some leftover food. Bring it back so you can have something to eat today. Your hunger can be satisfied. But now we're in chapter 3. And the reality is, Ruth and Naomi, that's nice that Boaz is being kind for them, but they need more than his Meals on Wheels to provide them with a future. You see, in ancient Israel, a kind of a blessed life, it was all defined about land and children. If you remember, Naomi is from the little town of Bethlehem, and her family once owned land in that town. But now that she's returned, she doesn't have it anymore. It's been passed on. Israelite society gave her the right to buy it back, but she doesn't have any means or wealth to do that. And even if she could buy the land, she doesn't have anyone, especially children, to work that land and produce a crop that can provide for her and her family for years to come. So her entire family legacy and sense of blessing has been lost. But even though in that society she's basically lost everything and lacks all means to change her situation, she still has a leg up on your average acting Boxborough resident. Why? Because she is one of God's covenant people, and so she never needs to wonder where to look for help. She knows that God has already established this vocation, this solution, the Goel, the Redeemer, whose job is exactly for times like this. The God she knows has woven a plan for redemption into the very fabric of their culture. You see, according to God's plan, if there was ever a time when a family member lost their land or inheritance, or had been sold into slavery, or had become an orphan or a widow, or treated unjustly, or economically or socially deprived in any way, God had already built into their society this role of Redeemer, whose job it was to rescue, to protect, and defend the family, whatever it takes. Whether that meant buying back that lost land, or buying someone out of slavery, or marrying a widow so the family could have a legacy, or providing a home for an orphan, or even avenging and seeking justice on a family member's behalf. And usually it was the oldest male relative whose job it was to be the Redeemer. And so Naomi, for as hopeless as her situation is, she knows where to go with her pain. The first thing she does is she takes her heart and turns it to this God of mercy, who is always at work and makes plans for when things go wrong. And then her eyes start to turn and look for a kinsman redeemer. And so she reaches out to Boaz, this relative, because she knows he can redeem her life. You know, when you're in pain, it can totally change a situation when you have these two things. When your heart is able to trust that God really is at work with his turn towards you and planning to make a way for you. And when you also know that God has someone, a community for you to call upon and reach out to, someone, some group who will provide for you, protect you, and defend you, and help you recover what's been lost. That can change your situation radically. Now, I know there's some of you who, man, that sounds good, but you might be kind of skeptical of the kinsman redeemer notion, right? Because you've had that family member or that friend who's made the not so great decisions again and again, and they keep knocking on your door saying, hey, can you bail me out? Maybe some of you heard of the woman who spent her family's life savings and rent money on Powerball tickets, and then when surprisingly she didn't get the winning ticket, she started a GoFundMe page to ask for her Facebook friends to help her raise all of her life savings back again. I thought that was funny. Okay. Right? Is that what being a kinsman redeemer is? Like contributing to Cinnamon Nicole's bad decisions and enabling them? It's not. In God's blueprint, being a redeemer is not a call to enable irresponsible behavior. It's not a call to enmesh ourselves in dysfunctional systems, but it is a call to show mercy, no matter the circumstances. It is a call for us to recognize that our resources, they're gifts on loan to us, and we are to use them to protect, provide for, and defend those in genuine need. So part of our responsibility as God's people is to be merciful. And when we're merciful, we're simply reflecting the one who formed the tribe of Israel in the first place. The God who formed and knit each one of us together and who redeems our lives by the Redeemer, Jesus, sent to deliver us from our own dysfunction and irresponsibility. Being a redeemer is just about being like God, like Jesus. Do you have someone like that gives you a vision of what your life is for? I often tell Becky that what I really want to do in life, kind of when I grow up, is be like my grandfather, Paul. Paul passed away a few years ago, but he's from the South, and man, he just wore cardigan sweaters and made jokes. But he spent all of his time and energy investing in family, and those who didn't have a family, and just protecting them and praying for them and doing what he could to provide for them. And for me, just when I was around Paul, it was so life-giving, and it established for me the vision of what family life is all about. For the tribe of Israel, it was God who established that vision of what being family is all about. You know, actually, this word goel that we're talking about today, it's used in the scriptures more often to describe God than humans. It's one of the primary ways of describing God. So when Abraham was wandering and lost in the world without knowing God, what does it say? God redeemed him. When the people of Israel were chained in slavery and down in Egypt, God redeemed them with an outstretched arm and mighty acts of judgment. It's how the New Testament describes the saving work of God in Jesus Christ. Rescuing, buying back, protecting, defending, saving what was lost, advocating for justice, doing what you can to make things right again. That is what God primarily does and what we, the people of God, are supposed to be about. That's why earlier in Ruth, when Boaz first meets Ruth and knows of her situation, he says to her something very interesting. He says, "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." You see how Boaz knows God and how he envisions God is as a redeemer, as one who stretches out his arms, his wings, his protection to widows, to orphans, to anyone who's been lost. And he offers them all the love he has to give, offers them forgiveness and a second chance, and promises that he can give them a future they didn't think possible. And so when Ruth, late at night, goes to Boaz on the threshing floor, and the circumstances are very questionable, she kind of cozies up to him late at night and kind of lays at his feet and lifts up the garment at very questionable circumstances, and she says to him, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you're a guardian redeemer of our family." Now, in that culture, one way to interpret what she was saying was that it was in a sexual advance. Spread your garment over me? Okay, get it. But because Boaz knows a redeeming God, he interprets it differently. He understands that Ruth is a widow without a family. He understands Naomi has lost her land and she needs to buy it back. He understands that they're related, and his role is to be a redeemer. And so when she says, "Spread the corner of your garment over me," he knows that what she's really asking for him to do is to embody the redeeming love of God and stretch out his wings, his arms, his resources, and rescue them. And buy back the land that's been lost. To marry Ruth so she can have a future. To give them lives, redeem their lives so they can experience God's blessing again. That's what Boaz is about. A guardian redeemer. So I reflect on that. I think we're called as we live into the story of God, we're called to be guardian redeemers to one another and to this community. That's not something extraordinary that maybe just a few of us are called to. That is who we are. That's the God we worship and what our hearts and lives are supposed to be about. So I want to talk about what that means. And being a redeemer is a step beyond everyday kindness. It's a step beyond niceness. It's a step beyond putting your leftover loose change in the Salvation Army bucket. It's this much more encompassing life decision to be willing to spread out your wings, your resources, your power, your gifts that God's given you, God's loaned you, and use them to redeem the life of somebody else. That's a high calling. But that is our calling as the people of a redeeming God. Some of you know Dave Swain. He's one of the pastors at High Rock Arlington. He's preached here a few times. Many years ago, when they were, after a few years of being married, Dave and his wife, Michelle, they realized that they wouldn't be able to have any biological children. And that was so painful, especially for Michelle, because she just longed to have a large family, to have kids and be able to raise them. They felt so empty-handed, felt so much pain. But they made the decision to take their pain, their empty hands, and offer them to God, trusting that He is a redeeming God who is at work, one who can transform their pain. They asked God, can you transform our pain and make your redeeming love, make it the centerpiece of our family? And soon after that, they made that kind of decision and offered their pain to God and His redemptive plan. Soon after, God kind of sent into their path, and they found out about this baby who needed a home. And for as much pain as they had, they were starting to live into the story of redemption, and so they opened their doors, spread out their wings, and they adopted this baby boy, Noah. And that was sweet, and that was good. But then soon this other opportunity came up. And so they did it again, and they opened their doors, and they adopted Zoe. And they were kind of on a roll at this point. And so then they found out about Taylor, and they opened their doors for him, and they adopted Taylor. And at this point, adoption agencies locally, they had Dave and Michelle on speed dial. And so when there was an urgent need, they knew the family they should call. Like, that's a kinsman redeemer kind of family. And so when someone called the Swains and told them of 3 siblings in Africa, Vincent, Angelina, and Neo, who had been orphaned, whose parents had been killed and were living on the run as refugees, they couldn't help but adopt them too. And then after starting to foster adopt this other young infant named Blaze, they sensed it was probably time to stop redeeming and start trying to feed everyone in their house. 7 kids. And so when they got another call from one of the agencies about 4 more children in Africa who had been orphaned and in desperate need of a home, they knew the most they could do at this point was pray for a God to raise up another family to take those one home. Right? We are a full house. The problem is, when redemption becomes woven into the fabric of your family, when redemption is the story of the God you worship on a regular basis and the story of your life, it starts to become contagious. And so while Dave and Michelle, they just felt insistent, there is no way No way we can adopt another child, let alone 4. Our house literally has no more room. Their 7 adopted children said, well, we can sleep on the floor, they can take our beds. Because all 7 of those kids knew what a difference a redeeming love makes. And so they couldn't but offer it. And so the family adopted Michelle and Julius and Abel and Emmanuel, bringing their family to 13 people. Like they're wearing Superman, Supergirl shirts there. It's a family with a plan. We're tapping into God's plan for redemption. If you ever visit the Swain house, they used to live around the corner from us. It is a full house, and it is full of arguments, tension, noise. Every single time I walked in that house, someone was bleeding. But it is also full of love. Full of people who now have the opportunity to experience and learn the difficult but wonderful and sweet lessons of love that they otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. You know, in the New Testament, in the letters to Paul, in Paul's letters, twice he uses this phrase when writing to the local church. In Colossians 4:5, he says, "Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity." And then in Ephesians 5, again, he says, "Be very careful. Be discerning how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity," because days are evil. There's hurt out there. Did you know that phrase, "make the most of every opportunity"? In the Greek, it literally means redeem the time. Use the precious time God has given you, because there is brokenness and need all around us, and be redemptive with it. That's our invitation. To not wait, but make the most of every opportunity to be a redeeming people. And so my question today is, what does it look like for you to redeem the time? For the Israelites, it meant that they didn't just give and practice generosity in the times when they had a little extra leftovers, but instead, for all the gifts they received, they gave the whole top 10%, the first fruits of everything God sent into their life. They gave it to God and His purposes all the time. So they would give the best of what they have, the best food, their money, their possessions, their time, their talents, their treasures to God's purposes, so that there would always be a vibrant worshiping community at the center of them, so that there would always be enough provision in the community for strangers and for refugees and widows and others who need it most. Redemption means practicing generosity first, not as an afterthought. Redemption means something like adoption is a normal calling to consider. Redemption means you can adopt a college student or your season of life and feed them something other than pizza. Introduce them to green vegetables. Redemption means you can start and keep supporting maybe a World Vision child, or invest in our Congo Clinic initiative, even while you're working to pay back all your student loans. Redemption means that your home is hospitable. And that means you don't just invite over to dinner people you're comfortable with and are really close with. You invite over people who need a home and need friends. And then you seek out and build friendships with them. That kind of stuff, it's not expected in our culture. And I think it's part of the reason why so many don't know where to go when they feel life has left them empty-handed. My dream is that when someone in this greater Acton area is in need of family and fullness, my dream is that they're not left scratching their head and searching the internet and feeling like, what can I do? I am so alone. But instead, like Naomi, they say, oh, I know the first place to go to find redeeming love. There's this tribe called High Rock, and redemption's kind of what they do. And then when that person arrives here, not only are they welcome to get a nice name tag, not only can they worship and reach out to the redeeming God of love, but one of you invites them into your home and listens to them. Spends the time to pray with them. And just lives in journeys in proximity with them. And builds friendship with them. Help get them, connect them to the resources they need to be redeemed. Can we be a redeeming church? What would it take for that to be our reputation? You know, maybe as you hear this story, you're kind of in a different place. You feel like you are the one in need of a redeemer in life right now. Maybe you're kind of feeling empty-handed. And if that's you, there's something in this story that's so important for you to hear. Boaz would have never been able to redeem the lives of Ruth and Naomi, to kind of live into his vocation of a kinsman redeemer, if Ruth hadn't risked reaching out. And that's so important because pain has a way of paralyzing each one of us. When you're hurting and depleted, it is so much harder to reach out for help or even to get your bearings. When you've experienced loss, the last thing you want to do is risk making yourself vulnerable again. Because what would happen if I reach out for a new relationship and I get rejected? Or what would happen if I reach out for community and it doesn't work out like I imagined it would? What if I reach out to God and I only hear silence at first? Here in this story, Naomi, she instructs Ruth. Ruth, I want you to wash up, put on some perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. It's a really interesting instruction because there's a lot here, more here going on than Ruth getting ready for a date with Boaz. In that culture, this instruction to wash, perfume, and then fancy up, it's what you do. It's what people would do when they want to mark that they are officially done with that period of mourning and grief in their life. It signifies a readiness to step back into relationships and friendships. You know, with all pain and loss, there is a time where you just have to sit in mourning and grief. Just let God minister to you, let people come to you. But there's also a time when God calls us back to life again, to reach out to God, to give and receive love and community. And that can be frightening because it takes vulnerability. It is so much easier to hide from the world than risk exposing your wounds to others and the possibility of being rejected. But if any of you are hiding pain inside today or hiding it from community, I just want you to take to heart the risk that Ruth takes to find a redeemer. She was a foreigner, a lowly poor servant who picked up leftovers in the field. Boaz, the redeemer, he's this wealthy landowner. In that culture, she couldn't just barge into his house one day and say, "Yo, Boaz, can you redeem me?" "Thanks, bro." No, she couldn't do that. So she needed to find a place where she could kind of encounter him. So Naomi sends Ruth on a risky stealth mission to find Boaz asleep on the threshing floor among the grain. Now context is helpful here. See, everyone worked the fields and they harvested this grain, but then at night the landowners and field workers, they would sleep among the piles of grain to protect it from robbers. So they're there at night hanging out in the grain. That's not that fun, so to spice it up, they'd be drinking, getting in the good spirits, having a good time, and then they just kind of fall asleep sprawled out on the grain, all the men. You kind of see where that was leading. So in Israelite society, the custom was that women looking to prostitute themselves, they would sneak to the threshing floors at night where no one could see, none of the family members knew about it, and that's where they could have illicit sex where no one knew about it. So this is so interesting. Basically, Naomi is asking her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who has this incredibly noble character, to sneak around, basically pretending she's a prostitute, risk being seen at the threshing floor, all in order to get a private hearing with Boaz, the kinsman redeemer. And so in order to reach out for redemption and take hold of the transformation God wants to do in her life, to see if God can provide a second chance through Boaz, Ruth risks her reputation, misunderstanding, and rejection. But sometimes you need to make that big of a risk in order to find God's redemptive provision for you. Part of entrusting yourself to God, trusting that God's at work, it means risking a new friendship, risking a difficult conversation, risking sharing your story, risking saying, I'm struggling and I need accountability and support, risking offering help even when you feel like you don't have much to give. I remember in college, I just had so much pain and doubt, and it led me into a dark place. And I knew the counseling center was just right around the quad. It was like 200 yards away. But it felt like such a big risk just to walk out my dormitory door across there and go in the counseling center door. What if someone sees me and thinks about me differently? But today, I am so glad I took that risk. When we were struggling in our marriage, Becky goes, my dad, he knows all about this. You should talk to him. Oh, I'd rather die than ask my father-in-law for help. Oh man, that took risk, humility, lots of humility, trust. To say, Dad, can you meet me at Dunkin' Donuts and talk to me about marriage? I'm wrestling here. But I'm so glad I did. It's not true that God helps those who help themselves. But it is true that when our hands are empty and our soul is hurting and we need God to work in our lives and we need community and we need the gifts of church family, we do have an invitation to reach out our hands and ask. Ask, and you will receive. Knock, the door will be open. Bring your pain to God. And then engage life, community, anticipating, trusting that God will provide through the people around you. There is an invitation for us to engage in authentic community and to go to your pastors with pain, your small group, or other safe relationships and share your real struggle and invite God's redeeming love into the story. We're going to respond in just a moment. I'm going to invite the worship team to start heading up. I just want to acknowledge this, that we are all a people, all of us. We wrestle with pain, with problems. But may it never be said of us that we don't know where to go with our pain. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song that we sang a couple weeks ago. It's called It Is Well. And it was inspired these events by a guy who went in incredible pain, but he experienced this truth that God's redemption, God is with him and still has a plan, even in the hardest moments. And so as we sing that, I just want to invite you, we're going to stand, we're going to have kind of a hearts of prayer, to think about what it means for you to open up your heart and reach out your hands and ask God to come and be your Redeemer. Your pain will not disappear instantly. But there is this kind of peace, this wellness, this change of mind that comes when you know that you have a place to go with your pain. When you know that God is for you and he's working to redeem you and to do something different in your life, I invite you, wherever you're at, to reach out to God today. Would you bow your heads with me in prayer? Heavenly Father, you created us, you formed us. And your whole story is that for all of our pain, our brokenness, our problems that we don't know how to solve, that you are working, that in your wisdom and mercy, you are promising and making for a way forward even when we can't see it. We look to Jesus and we see a life that fully understood our pain and our wrestling and our brokenness. But there's a way forward there. God, I pray today in your people here that we would open up our hearts and reach out to you, that your Spirit would move and be present, and that you would spread out your wings, your resources, your presence, and start to provide and encourage. God, push us into community, push us into authenticity, push us into safe friendships where we can experience your transforming love. As we continue in a spirit of prayer, I just ask you to reflect on that question. Where do I need to take a risk to reach out, connect with God, connect with his people? And some of you might also need to ask the question, what does it mean for me to be a redeemer? What has God given me, loaned to me, that I can stretch out and offer to others in a way that might change their life forever? The prayer is that the Spirit will lead you. So together that we might all live into the redeeming love of God. Just invite you to stand, and the worship team's going to lead us.